All right, hearing nobody chime in, let's get rolling with the agenda. So today we wanted to share some information about a couple resilience programs and activities and studies that have been out there. And so we have a couple speakers. First is going to be Vanitha. She's going to talk about some work that's going on between DC and Alaska on a relocation framework, and I'll let her give more information about that. And then Nathan's going to tell us about some work he and Danielle Meeker have been doing on synthesizing all the different types of adaptation planning needs that exist across the state. And then I'm just going to take a brief minute and kind of do look a little bit in history and remind us all of some work that was done during the Governor Palin days. There was a research needs working group, and I just want to run everybody, kind of refresh your memories on what those were to kind of see how that matches up with what we're doing today. And then we'll add in any other discussions we have time for. So without further ado, Vanitha, welcome, and tell us what's going on with this thing we all hear about, relocation framework.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and thanks for inviting me to the call and for all of you being interested in this topic. So again, my name is Vanitha Sivarajan. I work at the Department of the Interior's headquarters building here in DC, and I work in the Policy Analysis Office. And as all of you know, there has been a lot of challenges facing the Alaska Native villages due to climate-related impacts over the past couple decades. And it's no surprise that some of them have been facing some really difficult decisions to relocate. Here about 2 years ago, there were some conversations that were bubbling up through the Arctic Executive Steering Committee and the Coastal Resilience Working Group, which I'll mention a little bit after the discussion about the relocation framework, that we really need to do something about it at the federal and state levels. There's already been a ton of work going on the ground around planning, and the state has had a lot of great momentum in the last couple of years around planning, but there's this huge gap of the fact that there's no funding for the effort to help communities relocate. So the AESC, the Arctic Executive Steering Committee, thought that this would be something great that the Community Resilience Working Group could take on. And so that's kind of where this effort formed. As a team, a lot of the federal agencies got together with the state of Alaska and with the Denali Commission to commit to looking at what can we do, what kind of framework or guidance documents can we create together to kind of look at some of these issues and really streamline efforts as to where we can make things easier, especially looking at what's been going on in Newtok and Shishmaref, Shaktoolik, and Kivalina. So there's an interagency team which consists of the Denali Commission, the State of Alaska, EPA, USDA, BIA, and HUD. We meet every 2 weeks, and we are basically working on, we're trying to put together this relocation document framework that is basically a guideline that it's both for the audience of it is for federal agencies as well as the villages. So some of the ideas around this is that because it's such a complex topic, we're trying to break down where are all the barriers and see what is kind of low-hanging fruit. If we don't have money appropriated for relocation, where can we kind of eliminate some of the little barriers that we've been experiencing on the ground with Newtok and really break that down into different steps. And we feel through this effort that it's a really special situation and that merits a special framework for the Alaska Native villages. So while there are other communities throughout the country that are also facing these challenges, we feel that because the situation is unique to Alaska, this framework could be really useful and also inform efforts in the lower 48 as well as internationally. So some of the barriers that we've identified is that federal and state authorizing mandates to relocate communities have lacked the funding. And there's also a lack of clear guidance on relocation as to how to use existing agency expertise and funding streams. And the availability of land has changed due to enactment of various federal land legislation. And that the cost of relocation has been increased dramatically due to stringent building standards, as well as the rising cost of fuel, transportation, and building materials. So as a team, we got together and we decided that based on those barriers, we wanted to build this framework, which we're calling as a collaborative interagency relocation framework. And we've identified 3 goals. The first goal is that we want to be able to provide guidance and best practices on the data and analysis necessary to make sound decisions to help communities to decide if they want to relocate versus protect in place, or if they want to do some kind of assisted migration. And then the second goal is to identify a step-by-step roadmap where both the communities and agencies can take once a community has decided to relocate that will result in a more efficient relocation process. And then the third goal is that we want to provide recommendations for changes and improvements that will streamline the use of existing federal and state resources for relocation efforts. So that's kind of a big overview. And just to give you a couple, so we're still in the drafting phase of this document, and we have targeted that we will have a rough draft by the end of this fiscal year. And I just maybe thought of touching on a little bit of the methodology that we are using. So one of it is to look at case studies of historical relocations and community moves, because there are a lot of examples throughout the history in Alaska around Alaska Native villages that have relocated, whether or not it was through a disaster declaration. And I have one of our members of our committee on the call today, Anne Gravier from HUD, and she has been kind of leading this effort, and I was going to invite her to just say a few words about this.
Hi, thanks, Vanitha. This is Anne Gravier from HUD. I just wanted to say that I've been reviewing the work that had been previously done both by DOI on analyzing the case studies. They put together a pretty nice spreadsheet of 31 communities that have either relocated or migrated or resettled known cases in Alaska, and started to kind of flesh out the particular details and categories on the spreadsheet about, looking for commonalities and differences in the different types of relocation efforts. And then some further work was done by NOAA's intern this summer, who helped to further kind of compile and the data information, and then help, I think, add to a narrative summary version. So as one of the members of the committee, I've been reviewing the work, and it's actually been some great work that's gone on ahead of us, but it just kind of helps to bring to mind that this type of review of at least a significant number of case studies can cause us to kind of relook the criteria by which we tend to measure, like looking at our definitions, like what's the difference between, we have definitions for migration and relocation, but in some cases the lines are a little bit blurry. While the review of the case studies will cause us to go back and say, hey, we need to be a little bit more clear, at least in terms of how we want to define these, so that we can put, even though they're closely related, we can categorize them for just the sake of being able to analyze the lessons learned that come out of these case studies. So really some terrific work gone on ahead, and just some additional work on reviewing and kind of getting the information synthesized so that we can get it into a draft report by the end of the fiscal year, that Vanitha had mentioned.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne. That's a great summary. Yeah, we really feel like it's important to look behind and see what has been done and how that can help us to determine the best way forward. So a few other things I thought I'd mention about the methodology. We also felt that it's important to look at the cost of inaction, or the cost of doing nothing, especially using some of the economists here in my office. In the Office of Policy Analysis. This is something that they've looked at a little bit before, but just in terms of this question of infrastructure, which is really important to this administration, what that can look like to make that argument really sound. And then something else that we thought was really important is that some of the communities have mentioned a lot that, it's kind of like once they take a vote to relocate, then what next, or what steps do they have to take? What are federal agencies and state agencies looking for? And so Sally Cox from the state and Don Antrobus from Denali Commission have done a great job fleshing out what those steps look like from our point of view, and they've put that together in a list. And I think that there could be multiple versions of that, because there's kind of like the bigger overview of like what are the main steps, but then each step kind of has its own sub-steps, and some of those steps can overlap, and different agencies have different requirements and timelines. So that is really important, I think, for the meat of this document. And later this year, in October and December, we're talking about doing a tabletop exercise, leveraging the time that New Talk, it will be in Anchorage for their, well, I think it's for ASN, yeah, mid-October, they'll be in Anchorage, and then Shishmaref will also be in town at the same time when they're planning on doing an interagency meeting with Sally Cox's group. And so we're going to take advantage of the fact that they're there, and then have a half day to do a tabletop exercise to walk them through these steps that we've identified and get their feedback. And then later at the BIA Providers Conference, we're talking about doing that same exercise with Shaktulak and Kivalina, with folks from New Talk and Shishmaref kind of acting as advisors in those sessions. And then we'll also do a general tabletop exercise for any interested community, because as you know, just the 4 communities are not the only ones that are facing these tough challenges. So those are exciting, and I'm sure that maybe we can post stuff through the IARPIC website so that you all are aware and can all attend as you can. I guess, and then the last thing that I just wanted to mention is that we're also in the middle of doing agency interviews. So we feel that this document is really coming from an agency perspective. So kind of what we feel here on the agency side of things, like where are the barriers in terms of programs and statutes and policies that are inhibiting or preventing fast action on addressing some of these needs. And so we're having interviews with multiple agencies, really focusing on some really key questions to try to tease those answers out. And some of those are like looking at, like really drawing from New Talk and the lessons learned behind New Talk. So looking at the steps and the timeline that the village was able to access an agency's programs and grants during their relocation process. How did that assistance come to be, whether that was a competitive grant or if it was an informal request? What triggers are there that can activate funding? Can those funds be applied to other villages in Alaska? Like what can we learn from New Talk and apply it to other communities? So that's just kind of an overview. I'm talking really fast because I also know I have to talk about the Community Resilience Working Group, and then I have to run to another meeting. So shifting gears quickly. I mentioned before that the Arctic Executive Steering Committee that group is under OSTP of the White House, and it was created under Executive Order, oh, don't quote me on it, but I think it's 13689. And so that group had started in early 2015, and this working group was at the time called the Coastal Resilience Working Group, and now it's the Community Resilience Working Group, so very similar names here. And this group has been meeting since about mid-2015. The goal is really to increase collaboration and coordination between agencies in DC and also Alaska. We had it only be open to federal agencies at the time, and now we're starting to collaborate more with the state, which is really great. And there's a lot of need for this information exchange between the two regions, as you can imagine. And so we mostly focus on resilience activities that are underway on the ground, including relocation. So the relocation framework fits perfectly under that working group. And we meet once monthly. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but thank you so much for inviting me again to speak to this group.
Thanks, Vanitha. If you've got a minute, let's see, does anybody have a question they'd like to ask Vanitha or Ann?
Hi, this is Rick Tolman with Weather Service. And I guess question for either, the spreadsheet that Ann mentioned, is it possible that that could be shared?
Hi, Rick. This is Vanitha.
I'm going to let Vanitha answer that question.
Sure. And hi, Rick. I know I met you last year at Robin Bronin's workshop, so it's nice to hear your voice.
Yep.
Yeah, so that is, we're still very much in the drafting process, and we will be using that, we'll be updating that spreadsheet so that it's streamlined and pretty, and we'll have it in publishable format once the framework document is published. But right now it's just a little messy. So good question.
Understood. I would just put a plug in that historical context. Is really useful. So, you know, whenever it's appropriate, making that available is potentially really helpful.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. Yes, thank you. I have time for another couple of questions if there are more.
I'm going to buy a little time for you, see if anybody else is trying to figure out the mute button.
Okay.
So within Interior and within HUD, how do you see your agencies using this relocation framework in your work in the upcoming years?
Well, I can take a stab at that. Well, at DOI, we're still very unclear as to how, I think, obviously, the BIA is a bureau of the department, and BIA has been very involved in this effort. So I think that in terms of institutionalizing it within the bureau, that's going to be really great, because obviously BIA has a lot of involvement with the communities on the ground in Alaska. So we're really looking to BIA to help us to institutionalize that within the department.
Thanks, Vanitha. Ann, did you want to chime in from your perspective?
Hi, this is Karma with HUD.
Okay, Karma.
And yeah, that's fine. I'm Director of Community Planning and Development, and you know how this is used on the headquarters side, I really don't know, but I can see it being very useful on the programmatic side, working with tribes, working with local communities to try to help explain or find a path forward, not just for communities, but also for us, to find a language to talk about, you know, how do you do large scale new construction or of housing units in a way that works, that doesn't repeat some of the problems of the past. Mortgages is a very I don't know that alien's the right word, but it's a concept that's not very familiar with a lot of communities, and yet that's the concept that a lot of our programs would work well with. So, you know, how do you find the bridge between those two things? And I think that seeing the historic context and linking that with our current tools is a big challenge, and I'm hoping this tool will help everybody involved on the day-to-day, just trying to get through it process.
Karma, thanks for chiming in, because I know as I learn more about this, I'm hoping to be able to take a look at your work and be able, you know, when there's a choice ahead of me, do I go right or do I go left, to be able to take a look and to see if there's some alignment with the other agencies, or somehow I might you know, learn a lesson from the past and be able to make a better decision based on that. Rick, you asked about the spreadsheet. Did you have anything in mind about how you might want to use this?
I think I'm really intrigued by the past efforts, both for lessons that are potentially applicable now, but also I think we need to understand what's happened in the past to make the case that what's been done in the past is not applicable now. So I think we need that broader view, and that sounds like this will provide us with that.
Thanks, Rick. I know our intern took a look at some of the emergency response tools and assets out there, and one of the things, as he was doing a task for Vanitha and Ann and Sally on looking at the lessons learned, we kind of got some tips and tricks there to kind of say, wow, yeah, that's a really, what happened in this one community is a good lesson for us to make sure we take forward as we work across all the different parts of the federal government that have something to do with emergency response, you know, whether it's housing, whether it's an initial response, whether it's recovery, et cetera. So I really thank you, Vanitha and Ann, for sharing a little bit about this, even, you know, kind of a, I hope you'll see this as a little bit of a preview so that folks can take a look at this when you're ready to put it out there in a more complete form. And then maybe we can have some additional discussions about how it might enable us to work together across agencies, organizations, and communities. Anyone else have